we will glorify. We will glorify the King of Kings. We will glorify the Lamb. We will glorify the Lord of Lords, who is the great I am. For Jehovah reigns in majesty. We will bow before his throne. We will worship him in righteousness. We will worship him alone. He is Lord of heaven, Lord of earth. He is Lord of all who live. He is Lord above the universe. All praise to him we give. Hallelujah to the King of Kings. Hallelujah to the Lamb. Hallelujah to the Lord of Lords, who is the great I am. Please mark number 947. 947. Good evening. This is Wednesday, April 27th, and we'd like to welcome everybody here to the evening Wednesday midweek Bible study. We always ask for everybody to silence their mobile devices but not turn them on. Virginia Parish is at home. That's a good reminder for me. Glenna May, of course, we need to remember her. Talked to Ernest today, seemed to be doing real good. He had a couple of rough days before today, but he's back on track. Let's remember, I talked to Janet Russell this week. She seems to be progressing, but she has had the last couple of rough days, so let's keep her in our prayers. Have not talked to Gail. Has anybody heard from Gail Floyd? Is he coming along with it? Okay, so she's still recovering from the dog bite. I guess we're still trying to update this pictorial directory, so let's remember that. Pictures, I noticed the office was still open the other day, so if you want to do it, it seems like Kevin's still wide open to it. The meeting in Mount Vernon with Don Black starts next Sunday, so if you want to go hear him preach, he will be there starting on Sunday. Ladies' Bible class is over until September. You need to remember that. And the calendars for May 22 are in the foyer. There's another announcement that's been added about letting us know in the office. 2022 graduating seniors of our close families here. Names will be listed in the bulletin around the middle of May. Oh, that's just a reminder. Anybody we need to remember in our prayers, sick, start our Heavenly Father in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this many blessings. We thank you for all the good things that you do to us that we never think about. We know that you give them to us without us knowing our good homes we live in, all the food we eat, all the comforts we have, and all the blessings that we have all come from you. Let us not forget that. Let us study tonight and let Kevin to have a good open mind so he can teach us what he has on his mind to convey to us. Be with us and guide us. Bring us back at the first of the week after this midweek Bible study. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Beginning of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, there are some various different admonitions regarding the use of the tongue. And as we look through some of these, verse 2 says, "Do not be rash with your mouth, And let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. And several of the other verses there talk about the proper use of the tongue. And that wisdom, of course, I'm sure Solomon gained from personal experience, just like he gained from personal experience in the other areas of his life. And that's an area that we always ought to be concerned about ourselves. James tells us very clearly that the tongue can no man tame. And so as long as we live this life, we're going to have trouble with our tongue. James says, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive the stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships, although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds. They are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus, no spring yields both salt water and fresh. James has a lot to say about the tongue, and we need to listen to the admonition. The tongue is a small member indeed, but it can create tremendous and great damage. Let's seek to use it for the glory of God, instead of seeking to use it to destroy others. When we use it in that latter way, we really only hurt ourselves. Well, the lessons about the tongue are lessons that we can learn throughout the Scriptures, but they're especially appropriate coming from the book of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon is reminding us that words truly mean things, and while they don't necessarily break bones, as the old saying goes, they can certainly create problems, break relationships, and ultimately sever our relationship with God. Maybe someone tonight has had problems with their tongue, and they would like to make things right. If you're not a Christian, through hearing the Word of God and repenting of sin, having believed that Jesus is the Christ, you can then use your tongue to make the good confession. Yes, the tongue can be used for good also, and we need to use it for good. And having done that, you can be baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins. And turn your back on that old deadly tongue and go forward with a new, beautiful tongue that's going to bless and not curse. Or maybe this evening you need the prayers of the church because your tongue has gotten you in trouble and you need some help getting out of that. You can choose this time to ask for those prayers, or you can talk to one of our elders or one of our preachers or someone that you know and trust very well to help you with those matters. So whatever your need may be this evening, we invite you to come forward and make it known while together we stand while we sing.
Jesus is tenderly calling me home, calling today, why from the sunshine of love with the road, farther and farther away. Calling today, Jesus is calling, is tenderly calling today. Jesus is waiting, oh come to him now, waiting today. Come with pipes and that his feet will lay bow, come and no longer delay. Calling today, Jesus is calling, is tenderly calling today.
Our Lord and our Master, we're grateful to you for this night that you allowed us the privilege and the opportunity to come here and study another portion of thy word. We pray that you will be with us as we study your word and let us take away some things that we can apply to our everyday life. Help us to all tame our tongue and let there be no guile found in our mouth as we try to be more Christ-like. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Chapter 4. I got chapter 5 ready to go here in case we get done with chapter 4 tonight. Usually when I say that, we don't. But I like to think optimistically. Okay. All right. Well, last week we began looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and Solomon was thinking about the oppression that's done under the sun in verses 1 through 3, and thinking about how there is an equivalency there between the oppressed and the oppressor. They both experience some form of dissatisfaction. And verse 4, he says, "Again I saw that for all toil and every skillful work a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind." So he discusses envy and how that is vanity. You know, envy is a sin that it happens in the mind. It can have consequences in the world from the standpoint of one's envy taking control and then leading a person to do something to another that he or she should not do. But envy primarily is a sin of the mind. And that's something that we need to understand and reflect upon and know how it operates so that we can put a stop to it. A lot of people don't understand why they find themselves at odds with someone that they had very good relationship with, and then some event happens and they get envious of what's happening in the other person's life and are so eat up with that they can't stand to be around that person anymore. They just find themselves full of anger and hatred even, and envy is what causes all of that. But if one understands what it is, then one can fight it, Understanding who your enemies are or what your enemies are is half the battle. Envy lies to us. Envy tells us things about our friends and neighbors and co-workers and others that is false, always telling us that other people have it better than we do. Envy seeks to compare ourselves with others instead of with the standard, which is the Word of God. And as a result, envy leads us down the wrong path toward a false standard, comparing ourselves in a false way with other people. So we want to avoid envy in our lives. We want to avoid comparing ourselves with others. We want to avoid desiring the things that others have that we don't have, from the standpoint of letting envy dictate those things. A lot of times we will talk today we will use the word jealousy to mean envy instead of envy. But jealousy, sometimes we talk about being jealous of someone else. And that is, jealousy in the Bible always refers to something that is already possessed. Okay? So God, and jealousy isn't necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily a sin. Envy is always a sin. Envy is always a sin. Jealousy is not always a sin. God is a jealous God. What does that mean? It means He longs to protect what is His. And He wants to do that in the right way. A husband may be appropriately jealous of his wife. That is, he wants to protect what is his. He doesn't want any other man coming after what belongs to him. Okay? That is appropriate jealousy. But envy is always wrong, because envy is always directed towards something you don't already have. And that's the difference between envy and jealousy. Though in today's world, in the way the English language is going, typically people will use the word jealous to talk about envy. And so they'll talk about being jealous of something that someone else has. He got a new car, I'm so jealous, is what they'll say. But what they really are describing is envy. They're envious of that new car. So, but that may be a way of diminishing the actual sin itself by calling it by a different name, which is a very old trick that Satan uses. So envy. Envy is vanity and grasping for the wind, verse 4 says. And in this text it said, for every skillful work, all toil and every skillful work. So envy here is described as applying to a set of skills that someone else has. Okay? You can be envious of someone else's possessions. Usually we refer to that as covetousness. But you can be envious of it also. But envy extends beyond covetousness. Covetousness is usually related to possessions. But envy can be related to, for example, here it talks about a skill set. He's a great welder. And people look at that and think, wow, what a tremendous skill he has. And then somebody might be envious of that. A competitor or a coworker or something like that whose skill at welding is not as great as his, and he may end up creating an enemy out of that person because of that. You can envy education, someone's education. You can envy someone's family. What a great family they have. I wish my family was like that. That's the seeds of envy right there. Okay? Certainly nothing wrong with having a great family. That's important and good. And there's certainly nothing wrong with being single. That's fine also. But we should not envy someone else's family. So there's many, many things that can be envied. Really, anything that anyone else has as a trait, an attribute, a possession, you can envy someone's beauty, you can envy someone's wealth, just whatever. All of those things are objects of envy. And here Solomon is making a point of the idea that co-workers, may envy one another for the different skill sets that they have. And he said that's vanity and grasping for the wind. Look at verses 5 and 6. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. What does that mean? Verse 5, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Well, it's talking about his being dissatisfied with what he has, okay, and going to such a degree that he would destroy himself to pursue the additional objects that one can attain through toil and working. So, to have both hands full. This was a kind of an expression that meant that you had plenty, right? And having one hand full is sufficient, but having both hands full is an abundance, right? Can't exactly think of the word, but it's more than sufficient. We'll just put it like that. It's more than sufficient. So, there's people like this in the world. They're just never satisfied with what they have. They always want more. They're always looking for more. They have both hands full, but yet they still consume. Okay? And people like that are never content. And they're never satisfied. They're never happy. They're always lusting for more and striving for more. Desiring more. This can describe a person's life in a lot of different ways. A person can be dissatisfied with his work and the position he has at work and want to climb that corporate ladder, until he gets to the very top. And when he gets to the top, he's still dissatisfied because there are yet more above him in other fields or in other ways. He may be the president of a Fortune 500 company, but he's the president of number 100, and he thinks I could be president of number 50, Right? So he gets to be president of number one. He thinks, well, I could be president of some government or something. There's always more to be desired. And Solomon is saying that this attitude of desiring more and more, never being content, is destructive. It's self-destructive. And so better a handful, that is, instead of 2 handfuls, better 1 handful with quietness. What does that mean? The word quietness here doesn't necessarily mean silence, like no talking or no noise or something like that. But quietness here refers to peace, right? The peace of being content with who you are and what you are, and not wanting to climb further, not feeling like there's a need there to climb further. There's something to be said about the peace of accepting who you are right now and loving that person. Okay? So that kind of attitude is something that we could all develop more. Thinking about something that Peter tells us in talking about living peaceable lives, and this is found in 1 Peter chapter 2. Well, I thought it was in chapter 2. But he talks about, maybe it's Paul I'm thinking of. But I think it's okay, I'm sorry. It's in Timothy. It has to do with the prayers for government. And that's why I was thinking 1 Peter chapter 2, because Peter talks about government there in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. But Paul also talks about praying for government in 1 Timothy chapter 2 himself. 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 1, therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority. Now listen to this. Listen to verse 2. That we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. Now think about that for a minute. A quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. God wants us to be content with who we are and what we are, and to lead that quiet and peaceable life. Now, is that saying that if, an opportunity for advancement comes up, that you can't pursue it? No, it's not saying that at all. Of course you can, if that's what you want to do. If that's available and someone is encouraging you to do it, then by all means, go ahead. But what I'm trying to get across is that we don't need to do it. Okay? There's a lot of things, and I want you to think about this for a moment, because this plays into what Solomon is talking about here in this section with envy and wanting 2 hands full instead of just 1 handful. We use the word need so much in our language, and it increases stress in our lives, okay? If you tell yourself that you need something, I need this, I need that, I have to have this, I have to have that. This is the kind of language that we use. We're really not telling the truth. There's only a few things that we really need, okay? Most of the time we say, I need this, or I have to have that, or we're lying to ourselves. Instead, what we need to say, and I use the word need there from a scriptural point of view, is I want this or I want that. Okay, that tells the truth that whatever it is that we're pursuing is just a personal desire, is all it is. Now, it's not wrong to want some things. There's nothing wrong with that at all. We can want a better car. We can want a better house. We can want those things. It's fine. But we shouldn't tell ourselves that we need it as if our life depends on that somehow, some way. We can be honest. We can say, well, I want to do this. That's what I want. And so, but this attitude that Solomon is talking about here, the one who consumes his own flesh, with his desires, he's always telling himself, I have to do this. I need this. I must do this. In order for me to be me, I need to do this, is the kind of attitude that Solomon is describing here. Well, he's saying that there's a better way than thinking like that. And the better way of thinking like that is to think, hey, I've got a great life. I enjoy my life. Sure, there's some things that I want. I'm not going to stress myself out if I don't get those things. But I certainly would like to have some of those things. But I'm going to be content, more or less, with what I do have and take life one day at a time. That brings so much more peace and contentment to your life if you live your life that way, instead of constantly telling yourself that you have to have this or you have to have that or you need this or you need that, because then you have just increased the stress level of your own life by talking like that. You've just, and everything at that point becomes urgent, right? Because if it's a need, well, then it is urgent, man. It's got to be done right now. And look how much extra stress that puts into your life thinking like that. Now, do I need it? No. At it that way, take down the level of stress a notch or two, and lead that quiet, peaceable life that Paul says we should be praying for, and that Solomon says is a lot better than someone who's got both hands full and still striving, right? What a picture. All right. Any thoughts, comments?
There was a story this week in the news, and I know somebody that's in the business related to this, that sums up what you're thinking about. This couple started a new business. They did it. It was on the local business. They did it by doing the same type of business for a company that was far off. It wasn't coming down here and checking on how things were going in their house. And they wrote 400 fraudulent receipts of work that was supposed to be done that was never done. And they just got sentenced to 6 years of bail fraud. And what they did was they bought race cars, they bought houses, things like, in my opinion, that just made me feel like it was things like you said, they gotta have it. And they went out of the realms of what was right and honest to get those things.
Yeah. Now that's...
Here, and I mean, I'm leaving this generic because Baker Daniels, a member of the church, is what I got told by a denominational person yesterday. And it could happen with anybody. So it never happened to me. But what you say is sobering, because it could happen. But they went out of the realms of their capability to acquire those things. And they thought they had to have them, evidently, to do that.
Ray?
That same thought in 1 Timothy, absolutely. 1 Timothy 6:6, it says, but godliness with contentment, which is full of rest, or you can drink, is great gain. So he's saying contentment with what we have is actually great gain.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and that's just the opposite of what most people think, right? They think, well, if I don't have great gain, I have to get great gain in order by not being content, right? And pursuing all these things. And then I will get great gain. But what Paul is saying is, no. Godliness with contentment is great gain. You get much more by being satisfied with what you have and where you're at and who you are than by seeking, this great, tremendous notion of needed self-improvement. I guess we could put it like that. Trying to say you've got to have these things. I need these things. That's not.
I think one of our downfalls is we use this worldly standard. It interferes with our spiritual standard, and sometimes we get off kilter. Godliness.
Right. The worldly standard is not the spiritual standard. That's correct. And so much of the world wants to make it the standard, the way life ought to be lived, and that's just not what God says. But again, I want to emphasize that it's not necessarily wrong to want some of these things, okay? You can want some good things in life. Just don't approach it from the perspective of I have to have these things or I need these things. Just be honest and say, you know what? I don't need that, but I would like to have it. I want it. And let that work on you a little bit, It changes your perspective on life. Yes, ma'am.
Some people do a lot of that too because they think they have to reach a certain status in life. And so in order to maintain that status, they think they have to keep wanting this and wanting that to keep a certain status, and that shouldn't be how it is.
And status is envy because you're comparing yourself to other people, right? That's all status is saying, well, this person is at this level and I'm at this level and I need to be at this level. That's envy. That's just envy. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Proverbs 17:1 is referred in the commentary about the quietness.
Uh-huh.
It says, better is a dry morsel and quietness therewith than a house full of sacrifices with strife.
A house, yes, or a house full of feasting with strife, some translations.
This is the
Yeah,
King James version that gets.
right.
When I think strife, this could also be interpreted as the stress that comes along with it.
Absolutely. There's a lot of stress in strife. All right. Verse 7, let's move on. Then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. So what's he describing here? He's describing someone who doesn't have a family, first of all. And they say, this person tells themselves that they have to work. They work all the time. They're a workaholic, His eye is not satisfied with the riches. Okay? He just keeps working and working and working and gaining and gaining and gaining. All for himself. And he never asks himself, who am I working for here? Why am I depriving myself of good? And by good, in this context, what Solomon is talking about is taking a break and enjoying life a little bit, going fishing or relaxing, playing games with the family, or he doesn't have family, but just relaxing and having a good time somewhere. Not working all the time. That's what he's talking about. And so what does he say? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. And why is this vanity and a grave misfortune? Because this person is consumed with his work. He has made his work his identity. Okay? And that is not our identity. Our identity is not what we do. It's not our labor. Now, a lot of people identify with their work. This is a very common problem. And when the work ends, they don't know what to do with themselves after that. And that's what Solomon is getting at ultimately. He's saying, one day, he's not going to be able to work anymore. That work is going to be over with. He needs to learn to relax, to not identify himself with his work, and to concern himself with more spiritual matters, to be honest. So, and again, this is a very common problem today. We have a lot of people who are workaholics, and they identify with their work. A Christian should not do that. A Christian should identify with Jesus Christ and with understanding who he is as he's made in the image of God. And why do I say that? Because people are so much more valuable than just what they can accomplish. Okay? For someone to identify with their labor, in essence, means that they've defined themselves in terms of their usefulness. Okay? And what are they going to do when they are no longer useful? Because we get to a point in our life where, and the older we get, the less useful we get. Okay? Now we can still do some things, but look, I can't do as much as I used to do when I was younger as far as work and labor and just manual type stuff. Now I can contribute in other areas, but the older person gets, the less and less he or she is able to contribute. And the slower one becomes with accomplishing tasks. And what about, people who are handicapped and who have disabilities of one kind or another? Are they less valuable because they cannot do as many useful things? Well, of course not. They're just as valuable as anyone else is. So, defining ourselves by our labor or by our work is actually a decrease of our own estimation. Because now we're saying I'm only as valuable as what I can accomplish. And that's not true. Anything that can be accomplished can be assigned a limited value, a limited amount of value, right? John put some new floors in the house not too long ago because of the rain situation. But that was a job that had a limited amount of value, right? You can define the value of that job by the number of hours you spend, how much you charge for labor, the trips to the store and back to get the materials. All of that stuff is calculated up, and you can come to a definite value about that. Well, you could do that. You could do that for your whole life, right? You could say, okay, well, I've done this, I've done all these things, and you would end up with a number, a limited number, if you did that for your whole life. And that number would not be nearly even close to as valuable as you are. Because God says you're worth the blood of his Son, Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ died on the cross for you. Now, how much was the blood of Christ worth? It was priceless, right? It's of infinite value. So to identify yourself with your labor is to cheapen yourself. It's to make you much less valuable than you actually are. And it's a way of trying to fool ourselves into thinking that we're really more important than we are. And that's a pride issue. And so that's what he's talking about here in this context, is the pride of a person who works endlessly without taking that and giving it to someone else, a family or the poor or something like that. This also is vanity, he says, and a grave misfortune. Any thoughts, comments?
He says that he didn't have any family, neither father nor son.
Neither son nor brother, no relatives.
You can always find somebody who needs something that you can help them.
That's right. That's right. You can always find somebody who needs something to help. And that's part of the point of this, is that this person is so self-centered. He's not interested in really helping anybody else but himself. And there's a lot of people like that in the world, who are sometimes this is referred to as egoism, an egoist. He just lives for self and doesn't think about the needs of other people. Yes?
In Ephesians 4:28.
Ephesians 4:28. All right.
Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need.
That's right. We work so that we can help others who are in need. That's right. Yes.
Even Jesus took time to take a rest and to meditate and pray. You can only go for so long before you have to take a break in order to renew your mind and soul. You just have to.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a good point. Jesus also rested from time to time. All right. Well, let's look at verses 9 through 12. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. The power of unity, right, with other people. That's what Solomon is talking about here. A person who's alone is vulnerable, right? They're vulnerable to mishaps. They're vulnerable to making mistakes in work. They're vulnerable to the cold, even to some degree. And they're vulnerable to predators. But if there's 2 instead of 1, then that can mitigate the vulnerability. It can erase some of that, so that a person's work can be checked by someone else and see if that work has been done correctly. Or if a person falls, there's someone there to help him or her get up. If they are cold, they can find another person to get warm with. And if they're attacked, then they have another person to help them defend themselves. Two are better than one. It reminds me of something they tell you. I've done some backwoods hiking, you know, in different places in the world. And they always tell you if you go hiking to take 2 or 3 people with you, especially in bear country. Because if you go hiking in bear country by yourself and there's a bear around, he's likely to come after you. If there's 2 of you, that likelihood diminishes something like 80% or something like that. Just 2 people, a bear will stay away. And if there's 3, it's almost nothing. Bears do not attack groups of 3 people. They just don't. There's no history of that at all. So, you know, how many of y'all are going to go hiking in bear country anytime soon? But it just illustrates the same principle that Solomon is talking about here. Where there's more than one, there is strength. And that's what he's talking about. The power of unity. And that's what he says at the end. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. You take 1 stick and you pick it up, you can snap it in half pretty easily. Take 2 sticks, you may have enough strength to snap 2 sticks. You put 3 sticks together, and 4 and 5, you're probably not going to be able to snap those, you know, just in your hand. You're going to have something stronger than that. When things are bonded together, they become stronger. Rope is like that, right? You take a little strand of rope, you twist it with another strand, you twist it with a 3rd strand, and pretty soon that rope is strong enough to pull something as large as an automobile. You know, if it's got enough strands in it, it becomes strong because there's more there to work together. The church also is strong when it is united. When the church is divided, the church is weak and vulnerable and has vulnerability to being preyed upon by outside forces and by inside evil. But when the church is united, they know what they believe, they agree on that, they work together to go forward. That congregation is strong, and it's not going to be moved very soon. Any thoughts? Yeah, Ray.
I was thinking, Jesus sent out the disciples 2 by 2.
He did. He sent out the disciples 2 by 2. And there is power in that. Yes. We can lean on each other when the going got tough.
Besides the physical, there's edification and encouragement.
We have edification and encouragement that comes from being together, right? Having more than one together. There's no such thing as a congregation of 1 member, right? That's not a congregation. It's just a single person. So, any other thoughts? Well, let's look at verses 13 through 16. Now, this one is this is also an interesting passage, but let's talk about it. Better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walk under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. There was no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and grasping for the wind. All right, what in the world is he talking about here? Okay, so he has in mind a kingdom. And there's an old king in this kingdom who is foolish and will be admonished no more. In other words, he's not going to change. He's going to do what he does, and he's not going to do it any differently. That creates a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction in people, because when someone is unwilling to yield like that, that creates some problems. Things change over time. Change occurs in this life, and there's nothing that we can do about that. And so we've got to have some ability to yield to change as it happens in this world, okay? Or we're going to find ourselves just like this king, shut off from everybody and not willing to be admonished. So now there's a wise youth, okay? And this wise youth comes out of prison to be king. And evidently he's caused some kind of political turmoil, seems to be the implication here. And he has landed himself in prison, but then because of his popularity, all right, he is coming out of prison, and even though he was born poor in his kingdom, all the living were with him, were with the second youth who stands in his, that is, the old and foolish king's place. Okay? So this youth is released from prison. He is, even though he's poor, nevertheless, he is popular. All right? Everybody loves him. He's popular. So this section here is about popularity and the folly of popularity. All right? So they were with the second, and there was no end of all the people over whom he was made king. So many people loved him, and he was made king over many people. All right? And now here's the lesson that he wants us to learn here. Yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. So his popularity is only going to last for so long, and then it's going to be over. All right? Now, does this sound kind of like politics in our world today? Right? You have the old president, and you got the young president. And everybody's tired of the old president, and they want the young president, right? So the young president comes in, and he gets a chance, and then he does what he does, and all of a sudden, he's not popular anymore. Nobody likes him anymore. They're ready for something new, you know. And Solomon is talking about the vanity of popularity here. That's what he's discussing. Surely this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. In other words, we should not be so concerned about being popular. That shouldn't be what our initial thought process is. And this can be a tremendous temptation for many people. You know, we see what other people are doing, and we think, oh, that's popular right now. I think I'll do that too. And then what happens? Sooner or later, what's popular goes away. You know, you can remember fidget spinners. I like to use that as an illustration because fidget spinners were so popular for a while. You know, those little things you hold and spin like that, and they just spin. And that was the rage, you know, fidget spinners. Everybody had to have a fidget spinner. And I remember all the kids at school having one, and they, you know, Gavin, Dad, I want a fidget spinner. Okay, we ordered one on a slow boat from China. By the time it got here, the craze was gone. He spun it for a couple of times and threw it on the floor, you know. He was done. And next when school year started, fidget spinners they were just done with them, you know. It only lasted for a while. I don't know if some of you older members remember this or not, but back in the 90s, it was milk bottle caps. Does anybody remember milk bottle caps? Maybe? Yeah? Remember that was whoa! And that I was already an adult when that happened, but my dad was still teaching middle school, and I said, what's going? You know, I walk into Michael's, and I see these milk bottle caps everywhere. There's this big, huge collection of milk bottle caps. I was like, Dad, do you know anything about milk bottle caps? What's going on? Oh, yeah, it's all the rage. Everybody wants milk bottle caps right now. I was like, really? You know? And then as soon as it came, they were done with it. Popularity. That's all it is. It just catches on like wildfire, popular for a time, and then it's done. Popularity is so fickle, you know. There's no telling where it's going to go next. So we should not worry about being popular. We should just worry about doing what God wants us to do. You know, Paul said, if I were a pleaser of men, I would not serve Christ. Because serving Christ is not going to please most people. It's not going to be popular. All right, we're out of time. We'll pick up with chapter 5 next week.